Thank you for joining our Achilles podcast today. I'm 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘆, Head of Compliance and ESG at Achilles. I'm really excited to be joined today by Satish Karkera. Satish, if you don't mind introducing yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. My name is Satish Karkera. I'm working with Achilles for the past 12 years. I'm managing a team of auditors. Primarily, they conduct desktop audits, and also I oversee on-site audit delivery in APAC region. So I'm finding it very interesting when it comes to on-site audits, and whenever I go out for on-site audit, I used to explain all audit finding and sharing the experience with my team members, and also a couple of times I try to share this audit experience with the wider group within Achilles India.
So Satish, we've known each other for a long time now. It would be great if you're happy to kind of talk a bit about some of the things you've seen since we started delivering audits, 10 years ago, something like that?
Yes.
The first trip we did together was in 𝗵𝗵𝗁𝗃 together. How have you seen things progress? So when we did that audit, 10 years? Oh, yeah, 10 years. What have you seen change? So when you've audited companies in India since 2014, how have you seen things develop or improve, or have they not improved? It'd be interesting to kind of understand a bit more about that.
Yes, we started with auditing companies such as wind energy.
Yeah.
And post which we have different buyers like wind energy, construction, oil and gas, and automobile also. Recently what we conducted for. So all these suppliers base, if I want to categorize from scale from medium, larger. When it comes to larger organization, always they are associated with the global enterprises, and obviously they are maintaining all those compliance which is required within the region and also globally.
And have you seen gaps? So if I think back to like the good old days, so to speak, a lot of the audits were based on the requirements, and still are to a large extent, the requirements of Western or European multinationals that are asking to see evidence of compliance from Indian-based companies or South Korean-based companies, as we know, and so on. How have you seen that development? So has there been a case where companies have taken some of the best practice or some of the requirements from European companies and established those arrangements, or do you think it's much like the organisations that we've seen in the past, that actually they're already maintaining a really good standard anyway, because it's kind of ISOs have been around for a long time and these organisations have had those things established?
Yeah, if I want to compare in terms of different countries and comparing with the Indian suppliers, I would say the audit outputs are mostly a similar one. We cannot compare with the developed or developing countries, and when it comes to audit output, that may be a major one, all those things. Even we can find those in those regions, so-called developed countries.
Yeah.
And also we can find some positive elements in Indian supplier as well. And like I mentioned, all the companies which are trying to cater their service globally, they are keen to improve their management.
Yeah.
So whenever we go for an audit, interestingly, if at all they are not adhering to what is required as per the audit protocol, but still they are keen to adopt that. Okay. Since we have a non-conformance model wherein supplier can make the adjustment once the audit is done. Yeah. They can work on those improvement areas that is within the stipulated time frame. Okay. And definitely they will go and try to close those gaps to continue with the proposed contract, and also to maintain the business continuity for that buyers. And things are improving, what I can say, even I can count on remote area within India also. The small companies also adopted ISO certifications that may be a quality, health and safety and environment. That is really interesting part. The company is keen to improve their management part.
Yeah. Well, to quote 𝗬𝗪, demystified some of the belief that maybe some parts of APAC or India aren't always to the same standard necessarily. If we say audit and we look at management systems as others, but I remember years ago when you'd look at Chinese companies that were exporting into the EU, and we've seen it here in India and in other parts of the world, where the quality, they almost feel like they have to be at a higher standard to prove themselves, because other countries not believing that they have those arrangements in place. So I think it sounds then that not only is there the maturity from the larger organisations, that you're also now seeing some of the, by the sound of it, some of the smaller ones or in more remote areas that are also looking to develop what they're doing to prove themselves. They've probably been doing good things for a long time, but sometimes, rightly or wrongly, having the piece of paper that shows that you're meeting certain standards is really valuable.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the audit findings only, the ground report only you will get once the company is audited. Let's say one example, like I witnessed over there, like the auditee presented when I asked for a certification. Auditee confidently presented ISO certification for quality management, health and safety, and also for environmental. All those 3 certifications he presented confidently. But gradually when audit proceeded, and I asked for the different policies procedure which is supposed to be in line with those certification, and he didn't have any clue to provide those documents. So that's definitely, misleading to
red flag.
Yes, that's the problem. That's one example. That's the remote area where the small supplier who's providing manpower and maintenance service to a wind energy.
Okay.
And if I just count on other organization, which is really a big organization, wherein the contractors, subcontractors, workers are supposed to buy their own PPEs.
Okay.
As per the health and safety standard, always the organization who are the one responsible to provide all the PPEs, required PPEs to the workers, which will ensure that the quality of those safety equipment are well within the standard. So when you put that into workers, obviously he will lead to buy those products cheaper ones, because
you want to keep the money for
that's the thing. Interestingly, when we say PPEs, that too, like one PPE, when I asked the worker, there's a body harness.
Okay.
We can just think on how critical that may be when it comes to any possible accident for the person as well as the company is liable for that. So we cannot judge on the small company or a big organization, but when the company is audited, that's the ground report what we get.
And what kind of audit was that you?
That's the ethical employment.
Okay. Yeah, so strangely, I had an experience similar to that. So, and this was in Europe, and it was a team of workers that were working at the top of the wind turbines in the gearbox rooms, and also servicing the blades. So as you know, like you've seen these places, they're tall places, so you want the equipment that works. But because it was in Northern Europe, in the changes in terms of the light, so where it's lighter for much longer, some of the workers were doing like double shifts. So they would start at 7 a.m. and they should only work to say 4 p.m. or whatever, but then they were doing the evening shift because it didn't get dark until say 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I asked, was speaking to one of the engineers there and said, like what time did you start? And he said, 7 o'clock, and it was obviously getting late. And this guy was checking the equipment to check that it was all tight before the other person walked up to the top, then climbed up to the top. And I just thought, like, around fatigue management and the risk associated with it, I just thought, like, not a massive fan of heights anyway. I would not want somebody that was tired checking my harness before going and working at the top of that turbine, and that was a ethical business audit as well. In terms of, like, we've all got stories of all the audits that we've done, some funny, some probably that we can't share today, but in terms of, like, all of the audits that you've undertaken, is there one that stands out? And that doesn't necessarily mean that it stands out for bad reasons. It could be the country that you were at, or just the kind of audit that you were delivering. Is there anything that you can think of that springs to mind, that you feel that by having boots on the ground it made a difference, as opposed to just being miles away and speaking to maybe a company over the phone?
I can just recollect one of company I audited in India, wherein, I mean, most of the people, I mean, are not aware of this facility. There's a crash facility for women to take care of their child where they work. And I just come across with the regulation even in India a couple of years back that has already rolled out within a company. I mean, more than 50 employees working in a company, they should have crash facility. So that is one of the best facility wherein you can find most of the women leaving, I mean, resigning the company just for during their maternity. If that facility, you know, comes highlighted within India, that will be more beneficial for women. And interestingly, as I mentioned, in one of the Indian company, that facility I have seen that they are providing.
Is that one of the only ones that you've seen?
No,
more
more companies
are doing
if you
this
just see the survey, it's hardly, I mean, 21% of Indian companies, those who are got, you know, within the survey, are not actually planning to do that.
Yeah. Okay. And you know.
And also, I mean, I just want to add one more thing here. Interestingly, in South Korea, where last time I visited, I have seen those, you know, facility wherein within the garden, small kids are playing along with their
siblings,
caretakers. They're, you know, enjoying those kids, and obviously, I mean, their mothers who are working within that organization work happily, and you know that ensure that children are taken
safe,
care.
Yeah, and there's a massive, obviously, well-being benefit to that, and cost benefit, and. Like, this ties in quite nicely. When I was speaking to Jake, we were doing a podcast together, we were chatting about the standards and again where with BRSR, and it talks about well-being and things like this, and there's a lot of initiatives like CSR and community outreach, community involvement, environmental protection, the use of volunteer days that have been kind of like just standard in India for a long time, as you know. Whereas if you looked at some of those things in the UK and in other parts of the world, you wouldn't necessarily, you wouldn't see it. Like, you know, I would love it if there were crash facilities at Achilles back in the day, because it would have saved a lot of money for sure. But I think that that's where we're quite fortunate with what we do in the different places that we've gone, that you can learn from what other countries do, or also what other organisations do. I don't know, I always found when I audited that being able to take something that you would see at a massive company, and you would then go and visit a much smaller company, but you were still able to share that insight in terms of what this company with 10,000, 20,000 employees were doing, but explain it in a way that they could still maybe use some of that knowledge that they'd otherwise have to pay a lot of money for in terms of consultants and advisors. Can you think, is there anything that you've seen in the big companies that you've audited around the world that would be something that could be replicated in smaller companies? So it might be a process or a procedure, or is there something that organisations could maybe learn from those big companies with all the ISO certificates?
Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of things which can be passed on to the other organization which is not in a large scale, especially when you look at supply chain management. That may be a small organization, but they're having supply chain, their own supply chain. So first, you have to adhere to about the standard, global standard, which big companies are there. First, you adopt those management system within your company, and then gradually you have to pass that on to your supply chain. Then only things will be smooth, and you can put yourself in the market in that stage wherein you are now ready for the competition within the market.
So I think considering this isn't prepared or anything like that, it's very nice to hear that what you're saying is very similar to what Jake and I were saying in terms of that supply chain management, taking some of those arrangements that are in the bigger ones and then working your way down. Because like you say, if you can demonstrate that you're doing some of those checks on your supply chain, it makes it, if you've got hundreds of companies that are all providing the same service, it's much better if you can show that you're doing the checks, because it removes the burden that we know a lot of our clients have facing.
Absolutely. I mean, if we look at supply chain management, wherein the critical areas, how you select your suppliers. So you should have a checklist of that. And if you look at most of the companies, that mainly focus on quality parameters and basic on health and safety. But totally missing on ESG factor, let's say carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emission, all those things are completely missing. But gradually things are improving now, since ESG is the main factor wherein you can see how investors are looking for those companies who are adopted such protocols.
And so have you noticed, are you seeing a noticeable change through the work that you're doing, the audits you're doing? You're seeing that?
Yes, absolutely. When we are going through the audit, auditing can explain us, this is what we had in earlier, this is the new version wherein we have added all these clauses.
Really? Okay.
Yes, that's improving.
And is that happening in companies' contracts as well, or are they requiring their suppliers to do more of this as well? So it's like a trickle-down effect as it goes through.
More on the supply chain audit also they started. Otherwise, initially only getting data from the suppliers and just keeping that data. Nowadays, what they're doing is they also conduct on-site audit of their supply chain. That's really impressive.
And so I'm obviously jealous of you, because you get to go to a lot more places than I do anymore, and you probably know every audit better than anybody else now, because everybody relies on you and your team in this region. Would you say that trickle down in terms of the change in supply chain management to look at ESG and sustainability, is that happening in a lot of the countries that you go to in auditing, or is it just in India because of BRSR and BRSR core, or in South Korea, or when you've been to the Middle East or other Singapore? Is this the same kind of transition, that it's broadening from quality and safety, which has historically been kind of the approach, into those other areas?
Yes, gradually things are changing. Like I mentioned, even now, earlier the audit protocol would be focusing on health, safety and environment quality, all those things. Nowadays it's focusing towards ethical sourcing and ethical employment practice. And one of the audit what we conducted in Singapore, that's totally focused on employees' ethical employment practices, wherein we used to conduct interviews one-on-one with the employees, workers, and we used to ask a lot of questions with regards to their well-beings, all those things. So lots more things revealed in terms of code of conduct, their welfare facility, their accommodation, all those things. So things are improving. I mean, this kind of data is really required for the buyers whenever they go for searching any investors. So employee satisfaction comes first.
And so I'll put you on the spot slightly, and then I'll say which I prefer. So in terms of the audits that you've discussed, is there a certain audit type that we deliver that you most enjoy doing? So if I said to you, right, I need you to help me with a ethical sourcing audit or verify audit or something like that, which one would you be most pleased in terms of being involved in?
Basically, health, safety and environmental audits are, the historical one. We started with that. But interestingly, when it comes to ethical sourcing and also ethical employment practice audits are most interesting. Wherein, otherwise you always interact with the top level management, managers, all those things. We all talk about a lot of documents, and when it comes to ground reality, you hardly get to see. When you witness on site, you can just oversee how the things are happening. But mainly we are relying on the document which is provided. But when it comes to employment practice audits, wherein you directly interact with the employees and you get to see what actually the employer is providing them, or how they are taken care of, all those things. So that's really interesting, and that will bring out all essence of
what's going on. Obviously I've not paid you before this to say that, but that's my favourite audit as well, because I think speaking to the workforce and understanding some of the challenges that they have, and it's much nicer than being sat in an office or something where you're, like you say, you're just looking at paperwork. And I think that I was looking at some analysis we were doing the other day in terms of the interviews, and there's over sort of 10 or 15,000 interviews that we've been involved in, not just the two of us obviously, and but other people. And I think that information is so valuable, both to the company potentially that we're auditing, or the work site, but also to our client in the end of it, because as great as policies and procedures are, and obviously they're vital in terms of evidence and also in terms of having correct processes in place for delivery of things, it's only until you speak to workers that you really understand, well, how have those things been implemented that's in that piece of paper? Because otherwise they sit on a bookshelf or something, and they never get, that information doesn't get shared. And also it's rare in Europe, and I'm sure it's rare here, and it is based on my experience, that workers don't always feel comfortable to raise some of the issues that they might raise with you or I confidentially, in terms of some of the things they're not happy with, or in some instances issues that are poor employment practices and so on. And I think they're really
the workers are not taken care in terms of working hours duration. So during the worker interview, I found that people are working more than 15 days, 20 days continuously. So when it comes to management audit, they have all the procedures in place, like one should get at least 1 day off between 7 days working. So when we asked for their attendance sheet, so HR guy nicely presented the attendance sheet, wherein I found out a person, the worker, worked more than 30 days continuously without any off. I mean, over here the conclusion is that when HR has presented that data to me, at least they should have checked that before presenting me if something is wrong. So we can figure out here, even being in a responsible department, HR department, they have not recognized or rectified that. Only when I gone through with the each detail, I could see that discrepancy.
And I've seen something literally 2 months ago, something almost exactly the same, and again with issues around, it was migrant workers, and again it was around obviously wanting to work more. They were potentially willing to work more,
to get more
to earn more money and to more overtime, but again ignoring, not wishing to ignore ethical side of things, but there's financial implications, because if it's in a factory, there has to be a shutdown if there's an accident, and then there's other issues. But we could obviously discuss audits and everything else for a long time, but I'm conscious that the podcast is coming to an end. So I'd just like to say thanks for your time and sharing some insight into the work your team's doing, and also some of the, I think, quite positive developments that are happening in the countries that
Yes.
you're visiting, and that change from quality and safety to look at broader sustainability issues. So I'd just like to say thanks a lot, Satish, for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you very much, Adam.
I'd like to say thank you to joining this podcast with Satish and I, and we'll see you again soon.